I came back from my brother's funeral in Grand Marais with my hands shaking on the wheel of my old Buick, the one I'd been driving for 19 years. The drive back to Cranberry Township took 17 hours in one stretch, and I did most of it with a hollow chest, stopping only for gas and bad coffee. But the moment I stepped inside my son's house, the voices coming through the kitchen door turned my blood to absolute ice. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The drywall on Meadowbrook Lane was thin, but the silence inside that kitchen door was thinner. I stood there in my wool socks with my hand frozen on the coat peg, listening to Amanda's voice clip through the swinging door. She was calling me a negative yield asset, a parasite who had outlived her usefulness. My own son, Jeffrey, just sighed and said he needed a minute. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I didn't push the door open. I didn't scream about the 37 years I spent breathing iron dust at the plant in Pittsburgh to fund his lifestyle. That is what people do when they still believe tears can bargain with predators. I carefully slipped my boots back on, picked up my worn vinyl suitcase, and stepped backward out the side door, straight into the freezing Pennsylvania rain. The wet air hit my face, dissolving the last traces of grief for my brother Gary. By 12 minutes past midnight, I was sitting on the edge of a stained polyester bedspread at a cheap comfort inn off Route 19. A neon sign outside pulsed a steady, sickly crimson across the white walls. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. I opened my cheap laptop, logged onto the network, and bypassed every emotional thought. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family for 7 years. Now, I realised it had been a subscription, with me footing the bill. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I clicked open an encrypted window and sent a single message to Catherine, my late brother's estate lawyer, up in Duluth. She was the only person who knew that Gary had left me $45 million in liquid assets. I typed out my instructions with flat mathematical precision, lock down the entire holding account, transfer the funds across 3 independent financial institutions entirely outside of Cranberry Township, move the titles of Gary's properties under a protected Delaware corporate entity, with me listed as the sole managing director. Then I gave her the order that transformed me from an unwanted house guest into the architect of a counterstrike, run an immediate corporate asset check and a full title search on the Meadowbrook Lane property, pull every refinance record, every private debt registry, and every line of credit attached to my son's name. If Amanda wanted to draft a fraudulent medical proxy to tarnish my sanity, she was going to have to do it from a foundation made of shifting sand. Catherine's automated reply hit my screen 3 minutes later, a cold confirmation that the legal wall was being built. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. When you spend nearly 40 years on the floor of a heavy industrial steel plant, your body memorizes the weight of structural metal. You know exactly how much pressure a frame can take before the metal fractures from the inside out. For 7 years, I thought my emotional tolerance was infinite. I had moved into my son's house after my husband, Robert, passed away. I sold our family bungalow because the silence in his empty workshop was too loud to live with. Jeffrey had held my hand at the funeral, his eyes wet with genuine tears, whispering that I would never be a burden and that the finished basement was my sanctuary. But a sanctuary does not turn into a laundry room a year later. I was moved up to the den, which was really just a converted sunroom off the back of the kitchen. The hallway leading to my door always smelled like burnt toast and heavy, awkward silence. The room had single-pane windows, no proper insulation, and a cheap space heater that tripped the circuit breaker every time Amanda ran the high-efficiency cycle on the dishwasher. In the dead of winter, the frost would creep up the inside of the glass, forming sharp, geometric daggers that mocked my presence. I never complained. I just pulled my old wool cardigan tighter around my shoulders, watched my breath freeze in the morning air, and told myself that being near my granddaughters, Madison and Haley, was worth the chill. What my family took for weakness was actually the invisible chain of a survivor. When an aging parent is systematically pushed into the margins of a household, a dangerous psychological phenomenon takes root, a quiet, learned helplessness dressed up as patience. You begin to accept smaller portions of food, lower settings on the thermostat, and shorter conversations at the dinner table, simply because you are terrified that if you push back, the fragile illusion of belonging will shatter entirely. You tell yourself you are being independent, that you are just keeping the peace. But the truth is much darker. You are a hostage who has learned to love the corners of your cell just to keep the people holding the keys from looking at you with open disgust. I had spent years acting as the invisible financial safety net for their fragile empire. I had given Jeffrey $40,000 from my retirement fund when his middle management position was downsized, and I quietly covered the back taxes on their property when Amanda's partner track stalled. I never asked for a receipt. I thought my invisible care was an insurance policy against being unwanted, but my granddaughters had been taught by their mother that elderly blood has an expiration date. Madison would walk past my room, scrolling through her phone, treating my voice like ambient static. They didn't know I had just inherited $45 million from my brother Gary. They thought I was just an old woman occupying an office space they wanted to reclaim. For 6 weeks, I stayed in that freezing room, absorbing their cruelty, letting the cold ground my focus while Catherine dug into their financial secrets. I went back to Meadowbrook Lane on a Friday afternoon, my face fixed into the compliant, vacant expression Amanda expected. If you want to trap a predator, you have to let them believe their own narrative is working flawlessly. During that entire time, I executed my performance with clinical precision. I let Amanda see me put my car keys in the ceramic fruit bowl and then asked 20 minutes later where they were. I let her find me standing in the basement laundry room one afternoon, looking around with engineered vacancy, whispering that I'd come down for something but couldn't quite remember what. I watched the small, tight smile that came and went on her face every time she thought my mind was slipping. From the corner of my eye, I watched her thumb fly across her phone screen. She was logging it all. Every sigh, every staged lapse in my memory was being converted into a compliance asset for her upcoming medical proxy. The toxicity escalated from quiet exclusion to a coordinated psychological assault. Amanda started leaving glossy brochures for Silver Linings Medical Resort on the island counter, face up, right next to my morning tea, letting them sit there like an unwritten threat. Then the public gaslighting started. Susan, my old friend from the steel plant, called me one evening, her voice vibrating with panic. She told me Amanda had posted a photo of a lighted candle on social media with a caption about navigating the dark twilight of a loved one's fading mind. She was publicly establishing her status as a suffering saint while completely rewriting my reality to the world. I closed my eyes for a brief second, refusing to let emotion blind me. There was only room for clarity. Anger is a luxury item with a high depreciation rate, and I was saving my capital for the spreadsheet. Every night, after the house went completely dark and the hallway smelled like cold drafts and forced silence, I slipped down to the laundry room where I'd hidden a small digital voice recorder. I transcribed their daily kitchen conversations into the black leather notebook Catherine had given me. Dates, times, direct quotes. Every time Amanda mentioned the words power of attorney or memory care, it went straight into my accounting. But while Amanda was busy collecting her fake data, Catherine was executing our professional strategy. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon from her secure line in Duluth, her voice carrying the cold precision of a forensic auditor. She had run the title search on the Meadowbrook Lane property and uncovered a massive structural vulnerability in their version of success. Jeffrey and Amanda were completely underwater. To maintain their high-end lifestyle and fund the deposit on the luxury build in Fox Chapel, they had taken out a predatory private second mortgage 2 years ago. They had completely missed 3 consecutive payments. The corporate ledger showed they were in a total default state, sitting exactly 3 weeks away from an automatic power of sale. They were on the absolute verge of having the house seized and sold from under them, and Jeffrey had no idea because Amanda was hiding the notices. Amanda thought she was measuring me for a straitjacket, but Catherine and I were already tracking the trajectory of the noose. Just when you think you have measured the exact depth of human greed, the floor drops another 10 feet. On the third Tuesday of December, Catherine called me from her secure line in Duluth. I could hear the rustle of corporate disclosure filings through the speaker, her breathing deliberate and measured. She had uncovered the names behind the anonymous shell company holding the second mortgage. It wasn't just a blind investment pool. The trail led through a corporate registry, straight to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. And the sole managing director of that entity was a man named Bradley Amanda's biological brother. I sat at the small table in my freezing sunroom, the cold air biting into my skin, but my fingers were perfectly steady on the desk. Amanda's brother held the private debt, but the twist went much deeper than a simple conflict of interest. It was an execution. Catherine uncovered the ledger trail and proved that Amanda hadn't just hidden the defaulted notices from Jeffrey. She had actively orchestrated them. She was the one managing their joint banking access, deliberately funneling their liquid cash into the Fox Chapel luxury bill deposit while letting the second mortgage fall into a triple default state. She was setting her own husband up for an unrecoverable personal bankruptcy. This was a pre-planned, hostile divorce strategy. She was going to use the fraudulent medical proxy to lock me away in silver linings, wipe out Jeffrey's legal claim to their assets through her brother's corporate foreclosure, and then exit the marriage with the new house entirely in her name. My son was being fattened for a financial slaughter by the woman he had spent 15 years trying to appease. The cruelty was staggering, but my reaction remained entirely clinical. This wasn't a family squabble anymore, it was a transaction. Catherine asked me what I wanted to do with the evidence of wire fraud and grand larceny. I didn't hesitate for a single second. I told her to wire the $380,000 in full cash from my holding account. We purchased the entire debt before the clock struck midnight, executing the paperwork through a protected holding company I owned. The title transferred to my corporation by Tuesday afternoon, making me my own son's primary secured creditor. I now held the legal power to fast-track the existing foreclosure process and take full control of the impending sheriff sale. They thought they were using the law to strip an old woman of her freedom simply so they could have an office space. They had no idea I had just purchased their actual shelter with a fraction of my $45 million inheritance. I tucked the corporate title deed inside my sweater, walked into the kitchen, and watched Amanda smile as she poured the wine. The greatest mercy you can show a monster is to let them think they have already won, right up until the steel trap snaps closed. January 8th arrived with a sky the colour of wet industrial slag. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into the kitchen of Meadowbrook Lane, accompanied by Catherine and her senior partner, both dressed in sharp, tailored charcoal suits. Amanda was sitting at the island counter with her laptop open, a blue folder spread out in front of her. Jeffrey was standing near the window, looking at his shoes. Laura, thank goodness Amanda said, her face instantly adjusting into her practiced medical proxy smile as she patted the blue folder. We've got the notary coming at 3. We just need you to sign the preliminary asset protection forms we discussed before the holidays. It's just to make things easier for your care. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, Catherine stepped forward and slid a heavy white envelope across the granite counter, right over Amanda's laptop keyboard. What is this? Amanda frowned, her smile faltering as she tore the seal. Her eyes scanned the first page, and the colour instantly drained from her skin, leaving her looking grey under the track lighting. This is an immediate notice of power, of sale and foreclosure. This is a mistake. Our second mortgage is held by an independent private equity fund. The private equity fund was liquidated on December 14th, Catherine said, her voice dropping into the quiet, lethal rhythm of an experienced corporate litigator. The loan was purchased in full by a corporate subsidiary owned exclusively by your mother-in-law, Laura. The foreclosure process initiated by your previous lender was finalised at yesterday's sheriff sale, where our subsidiary was the sole bidder. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Laura's corporation holds the official deed to this property. Amanda lunged out of her stool, her voice scaling into a sharp, ugly shriek that echoed off the high ceilings. You can't do this! I co-signed the Cranberry line of credit. You're a senile old woman sleeping in our sunroom. Jeffrey, do something! Call the police. Jeffrey can't help you, Amanda, I said, my voice steady, carrying the heavy resonance of the steel plant floor. And if you call the police, Catherine will hand them the digital recordings of you plotting to forge a medical diagnosis to commit elder fraud. I have 6 weeks of your voice on tape. I have your brother Bradley's offshore registry records. I know about the default trap you set for my son to force a bankruptcy before your divorce filings. Look at you, Amanda! Your entire life has been a textbook example of the illusion of power from an empty wallet. In our modern world, people like you constantly confuse having with being. You thought that by leasing a luxury vehicle, carrying a designer bag, and weaponizing financial jargon, you had accumulated actual power, but status built on predatory debt is just a rented cage. The moment an independent force buys the ledger, your authority evaporates because you have zero internal character to stand on. Your elegance was a performance paid for with stolen family blood. Jeffrey fell back against the counter, his mouth open, looking at his wife like she was a complete stranger. Jeffrey stammered, his voice trembling with utter disbelief. Amanda, your brother, you defaulted on purpose? I didn't even look at her. I turned directly to both of them and said, you have until the end of February to vacate my property, sliding the final eviction papers across the stone. The girls can finish their semester, but your rented kingdom is gone, Amanda. Get out of my kitchen. Everything stayed silent for weeks after that winter afternoon, but in my head, the sound of the steel trap snapping closed kept echoing with a beautiful industrial finality. I packed the single vinyl suitcase I had brought into that house 7 years ago, along with a small cedar box containing my husband Robert's letters, and I drove north. I didn't stop until the Cranberry Township suburban grid dissolved into the endless, rugged expanse of the Minnesota Arrowhead. Today, I am writing this from the kitchen of the log house my brother Gary built on the rugged north shore of Lake Superior. The water out there is a deep, unforgiving, volcanic grey today. The ice just starting to fracture and break off the rocky cove. I had a local contractor come up from Duluth last month. He insulated the entire subfloor properly and installed a high efficiency furnace. For the first time in 7 long years, my bones are warm in the winter. My son Jeffrey called me 3 weeks ago. He finally found the clarity to leave Amanda, moving into a modest 1-bedroom apartment near the train tracks in Pittsburgh. He drove up here last weekend. We sat on the cedar dock for the better part of 2 hours without saying a word, just watching the loons cut through the morning mist. He didn't ask for a piece of the $45 million inheritance. He just held my hand, his palm rough like his father's used to be, and whispered that he was sorry for letting me become invisible in his house. Madison reached out on her own via a handwritten letter last week, apologizing for her coldness. Haley isn't ready yet. That's all right. I'm 68, and the lake has taught me that structure takes time to settle. What my family never understood is that real revenge isn't about destruction. It's about the justice of the seed sower. Most people spend their lives focused on punitive justice, on resentment, on breaking the hands of the people who hurt them. But that keeps you chained to the graveyard of your past. I chose to redirect my brother's fortune into the creation of the Gary and Robert Memorial Foundation, an independent network that helps financially exploited seniors secure top-tier legal protection and warm, safe housing. We've already extracted 22 elderly folks out of abusive domestic situations this spring. That is the watermark of true victory, turning the soot of their betrayal into a structural sanctuary that grows long after their names have turned to ash. I gave Jeffrey a position there, helping with intake. He's calm with the old folks. He listens and he's becoming his mother's son again, slowly. If you are listening to this right now and your own kitchen feels like a cold sunroom where you are being treated like ambient furniture, I want you to hear me clearly. Your blood does not buy a lifetime subscription to your submission. Forgiveness is a gift you can offer once the truth is on the table, but not before, and never as a chemical substitute for your boundaries. Love is not the same as unchecked access, and family is not a permanent license to exploit your silence. It is never, never too late to look at the people you have given your whole life to and say, no more. Now, I'm going to go pour a fresh black coffee in a kitchen that belongs entirely to me and watch the loons return to the cove. Because they're due any day now, and there's no sound in the world quite like the first note of a season that you survived. If this journey spoke to your life or reminded you of your own worth, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with one person who needs the courage to set a boundary today, and drop a comment below letting me know your thoughts. Let's keep building this fortress together.